Well, that was quite the finish, wasn't it? After a heated battle between Max Verstappen and Lando Norris, a coming together between the two title contenders handed possibly the biggest Formula One gift in recent history to George Russell. So the result looks like this. Well, as I say, George Russell led the way. He brought home the race with Oscar Piastri in second, Carlos Sainz third, Hamilton in fourth in the second Mercedes. Great result for them. Verstappen in fifth, recovering to claim 10 points. Hülkenberg in sixth, Perez in seventh, and Magnussen in eighth in the second Haas. Ricciardo in ninth, gaining 2 valuable points, and Pierre Gasly rounding out the points finishes in 10th. Then it was Leclerc, Ocon, Stroll, Tsunoda, Albon, Bottas, Zhou Guanyu, Alonso, Sargent, and a DNF for Lando Norris. Now, joining me to go through everything we saw in the remarkable last few laps and the rest of the Grand Prix, I'm delighted to welcome Alex Kalinauckas and Filip Cleeren. How are you guys? That was pretty good, wasn't it, Alex?
That was pretty good. Certainly better than what's going on over my right shoulder, which is England currently losing to Slovakia in the Euros. You know, my tone, my tempo may change depending on whether I glance to right and see that they've managed to get back on terms with Slovakia. But yeah, the Grand Prix, superb. I mean, the ending anyway, the first sort of 2/3 of it were pretty disappointing when it was quite clear that Max Verstappen was escaping at the start. But there were various points that kept it interesting. Was it a penalty for Max Verstappen being released into Norris's path at the first stop? Would have been harsh if it came. It didn't. And then, yeah, on the hard tyres at the end of the stint, the McLaren was quicker. It was coming down by quite significant chunks in places. Verstappen struggling to keep ahead of the traffic. And then, yeah, Red Bull finally in the pits, cracking on pit stops. Very rare that we see that for the team. And it set off like a truly astonishing chain of events. Very interesting, very controversial. But yeah, let's focus on that. Very interesting.
Yeah, absolutely right. I'm pretty sure Phil won't give a monkeys about what's going on with England, him being a man from Belgium. We won't talk football with him for a bit, but let's talk about the Grand Prix. Over there then, Phil, what was the general consensus? What was the feeling around the place then in Austria from what we witnessed?
Yeah, I have to say it was quite amusing to hear the loud groans when Phil Foden's goal was just disallowed. That was quite funny, in a way, not to wish anything bad on you guys at all.
Me? Why? Why would you say that?
Well, there's still time, you know. But no, this was actually... It wasn't the best race until it came alive at the end. It's a bit like Barcelona was sort of looking as if it's going to be that race, but then Max Verstappen was just a bit too far out and Lando Norris didn't have enough to challenge him, whereas now it was the opposite. For whatever reason, Max really lost out. Pit stops weren't great. He was struggling on the medium tyres at the end, and then Lando had the pace on him, and we had a kind of the battle that I think we all imagined was going to happen at some point, where this had to end in tears at some point. They've been so close for so many times. I think this is probably the first time that Max Verstappen really feels challenged by somebody consistently for like 4 or 5 races now. And yeah, it did go wrong this time. And yeah, it was a great battle until that point. So it is a shame that in a way we were robbed of it. But this is obviously a massive storyline and it's not going to end here.
What's great is when you get these storylines develop, you know they're going to carry on bubbling under the surface for the rest of the season. They're good friends off track as well, so it'll be interesting to see how it kind of relates to the media, how we see their relationship maybe move on in the next few weeks. But let's just stick with the first incident then. I thought it was an exciting-ish Grand Prix. There were battles throughout, particularly from the start. But what do we think about this big elephant in the room then, this incident between Max and Lando? Who was to blame? Alex, go on, you say first. Who would you hold entirely to blame?
Yeah, I think for the actual collision that gave them both punctures, it's definitely Max Verstappen's fault. The steward's ruling it as he was predominantly to blame because, you know, Lando Norris, if you attack on the outside, you do have to sort of accept a lot of the consequences. But clearly, Max Verstappen moves to the left. He doesn't leave a car's width because Norris is right up against the white line. There's contact and he must cop the blame for that. But equally, you know, Norris played a part in the whole thing getting controversial. He was pushing very hard to get in Max Verstappen's DRS zone. He earned track limits, enough strikes to get a black and white flag warning. When he went off the track in the previous Turn 3 attack, he earned a penalty. Now, there's sort of mitigating circumstances in that because Max Verstappen was, again, moving in the braking zone. It was all very, 2015, 2016, I think it was more, when he was doing that, when he'd first arrived, they had to create that Verstappen rule that really wasn't allowed. It's gone away in recent years, but Max brought it back really to the fore today. And I think that ultimately he should reflect on this as he lost himself a win, because what's Norris going to do? He's well behind in the championship. He has to attack if this championship battle that he thinks is on. Max Verstappen just has to finish second. But I think what's interesting with Max is that, and Andrea Stella mentioned this, it's all very, very 2021. It's like issues that went unpunished then seem to have sort of been allowed to still be there bubbling under the surface when Red Bull's got no opposition. And the thing is with Max Verstappen, he wants to lay down markers. He's not alone in that. Michael Schumacher did it years ago. Ayrton Senna, even Hamilton to a certain extent when he arrived, showing what he was willing to do and not backing down. But with Max, you ask him about it and he goes, oh no, I don't lay down markers. No, there's no sort of deliberate me choosing to do anything. Well, you told Christian Horner you wanted to win the Japanese Grand Prix by 20 seconds after your Singapore defeat. You were first out of the pit lane. You were in FP1 showing everyone exactly how quick you're there. You do lay down markers, Max. And I honestly think this is what he was trying to do with Lando Norris. He's gone, right, I've been squeezed at the start in Spain. We're finally going wheel to wheel. We're finally battling each other. Lando's giving as good as he gets, as he promised he would when he wasn't fighting Max in 2023. And I think Max thought, right, marker time now. That's why I'm not backing down, even though I've got this massive lead in the championship. They've come to blows because Norris didn't back down either. And there we go. Contact. It's eerily similar to 2021 in many ways.
Yeah, and the thing is, Max doesn't feel like he did anything wrong. Because Andrea Stella, McLaren team boss, also felt like this is the result of 2021 and Max, the way he drives, being enabled by not being punished previously. We also had, I think, his battle with Charles Leclerc here in the same corner in 22, if I'm not mistaken, where he pushed Leclerc out of the track and he got away with it. So there is an element of, yes, absolutely, Alex, he's laying down a marker, but equally, I don't think he's truly sorry or he truly feels like he did anything wrong. This is just his worldview or his view of racing. And this is a really important inflection point for two reasons. First of all, as you mentioned, they are very good friends, but Lando also said that if Max doesn't own up to this, I'm going to lose a lot of respect for him. So they will have to clear the air. Not going to happen tonight, but they'll let it sink in, let it cool down a bit, and they'll have to clear the air because they are going to race each other a few more times, at least this year and into the future. And then the other reflection point is what does the FIA do? Because clearly they gave Max Verstappen a 10-second penalty, so he's in the wrong here, objectively. But how do we move on? Because the moving on a braking wasn't punished. What was punished was a contact where we squeezed Norris and made contact there. But everything else was fair game until that point. So what are we going to do? Are we going to keep allowing this? Is the FIA going to take a stand and maybe not tighten up the regulations, but tighten up how they are applied? So there are some question marks moving forward about not only how their relationship develops or deteriorates, but also how are we going to see these guys race in the future?
It does open up a can of worms, doesn't it? I know that Max has said things like Lando was dive bombing. Once you dive bomb, it looks great on camera, but you physically, it's too late. You can't do that. So Max is blaming Lando on some of the manoeuvres he tried. Lando is saying Max was moving under braking too many times. Alex, what do you think the outcome's likely to be? Do you think they both have a case here? Do you think that Lando was dive bombing down the inside on moves he could not possibly make stick? Or was he right to have those attempts?
No, I think he was totally right to have those attempts. I think there's the second one where Max goes off the track where Lando gets it right. He locks up, I think, but he doesn't go off the track at all. So it was perfectly possible. And I think, as I've said, there's sort of mitigating circumstances in the first one because Max is clearly moving. And I know he denies this. He says he didn't move in the braking zone, but there's enough sort of slow-mo footage out there to see that he clearly reacts to Lando's move. And Lando says, well, that puts me off and that means that I end up off the track. So yeah, it's really interesting because in one way the 10-second penalty sort of feels about right for the contact because you can't really get into punishing the outcome. Like that's why Lando Norris is furious. He's saying it's destroyed my floor, it's destroyed my car, it's wrecked things for Silverstone in the cost cap era and things like that because those parts are so key to making McLaren fast. But I think Phil's right here. It's the element and it won't be punished at this point because there was no contact with them moving in the braking, right? Although, no, I suppose, you could say that's what Max was doing on the right-hand side. But when he moved left that triggered the contact and triggered the punctures. But actually, the other movements where Norris is attacking on the inside were worse. And that's something that won't be addressed, certainly at this race. I think that's the sort of thing that the FIA's got to come down on. But will they? That's the problem. It was the FIA not acting at Brazil in 2021 that led to Max Verstappen defending attacks against Lewis Hamilton in Jeddah the following race. So what happens next is ultimately critical.
Yeah, and then the other thing is, because I do in a way agree with Max that especially the first time Lando attacked on the side, it was a bit of a dive bomb, and he did lock up. So and went off track by himself. So in a way, Lando was definitely dive bombing there, but then he got a 5-second penalty because that was his final strike on track limits, wasn't it? And that doesn't really sit well with me, because if you go off track, you get a strike against track limits, that's fine. But if you go off track in such a tight battle, is that something that we need to penalise? Does that count as a track limits offence? Because they are pushing each other, they are trying to find a way past, and they are going to race and maybe not get it right or go wide or whatever. But that is not that's not an unenforced error, right? That is a forced error, and should that count as a track limits abuse? Because that also kind of ruined, or could have ruined the battle right there and then as well, if Max had known that he's got a penalty. So that needs to be looked at as well for me, because we all want to see good, hard, fair racing. But if drivers are going to be scared of making a mistake and getting a 5-second penalty just because they cross the white line, then that is a bit discouraging.
Yeah, it's interesting, this one. I think it's almost like a sort of, maybe it's a one-off because of the nature of this track. Like, track limits becomes a focus here because of the runoff areas, and I think the FIA did a lot of excellent work to fix that. But Norris was pushing the track limits still. There were places where you could still get it in his pursuit of Max, and he went right up to getting the black and white warning flag, which is bad. I don't think he should have been allowed to do that. But Phil's absolutely right. It's like, he may as well not have bothered, and the battle would have been completely spoiled if it's just going to be automatic that if you try and overtaking move, you go off, you lose 5 seconds. It's a track limits warning. Like, those track limits things are not the same. It's a different transgression. So yeah, it's I wonder, in one way I don't think it will come up again, because the Red Bull ring just seems to make these things pop up as the sun comes out and blinds me. Doesn't appear to be shining on England currently. But yeah, it's very interesting. But what's also a factor of that is that Red Bull is actually kicking itself a little bit because it didn't warn Max about the track limits penalty specifically after Lando had gone off. Like, I think Helmut Marko is saying, if we'd done that, maybe he would have thought, okay, fine, I'll either let him go, stay within 5 seconds, and I just won't fight him as hard, things like that. But I think the one thing that sort of sums up the absurdity of the track limits rule, and I'm not saying it's an easy solution to fix, Charles Leclerc had his final lap in Q3 deleted because he'd thrown it off the road about 3 times. Like, he was seconds slower than he would have been. It was not an improved lap. So it just shows you that the system, it catches everything, whether ultimately it needs to or not.
Yeah, it feels like it needs refining at the very, very least, doesn't it? Because, of course, if you don't gain an advantage when you go off track, maybe you don't have to look at the track limits. There was one phrase that Max has said, and that is that he said he wasn't braking when he moved. Now, does that mean that Max doesn't quite understand the rules on braking in the braking zone, moving in the braking zone, sorry, or is it just Max playing the game a little bit, Phil?
Moving on the braking, to me, is moving when somebody else is braking, not when you're braking. Like, it's the person that is braking, or the car that's braking, that is being put in danger when you move across. So it doesn't really matter if he was 100% on the brake pedal or not, or he was coasting. It's like, you are impeding somebody while they are braking, which means they don't have the means to just duck you or avoid you. They are, their tire grip is fully focused on the braking action, not on lateral movement. So whether he was braking or not, that's not relevant to me.
Fine. So let's just talk about the penalty then. I think we could discuss this for a bit longer, but I think the penalty, 10-second penalty, do you think that's a just penalty that Max got? Do you think it should have been harsher? Do you think it should have been maybe less harsh? Alex?
No, I think sort of covered it earlier, Bryn. I think that specific transgression is about right for what happened. It's sort of a minor contact. Also, how do we know that Lando didn't keep his steering in, and there's a second, because it's a second contact that gives Max the puncture when they run off in the runoff area. But anyway, just on that, I think as I said, the trouble is that the initial moving under braking, that's the point that could have got really dangerous, hasn't been punished and won't be punished because there was ultimately no contact.
What about the wording that's been used in Camp Red Bull? Christian Horner has said that Lando was looking for an incident in turn 3. Now, that's quite a claim. What do we both think of that? Start with you, Alex.
I mean, Horner backs his man. I don't see that as any surprise. What was Lando supposed to do? Not attack him anywhere? It's the exact point. I think Lando learned to stay on the outside line, because then you get DRS down to turn 4. Like, he put Max in a position there where if Max doesn't swing across and there is no contact, Lando probably gets ahead at turn 4, because Max is going to be pinched in terms of his momentum exiting turn 3. So yeah, I can't say I'm that surprised or that aggrieved by what Horner's getting at. He's obviously in quite a difficult situation because of the fact that he doesn't want to upset Max Verstappen at a point where maybe he decides to go to Mercedes one day. And I thought that was very interesting that Toto Wolff got a question. What did you think of Lando and Max? Was it like 2021? Oh, I couldn't possibly compare it to 2021. That's not what's going on there. Oh yeah, right, Toto, you're thinking about when you might have to have negotiations with Max Verstappen one day, whether it's for a 2025 drive or more likely a 2026 drive. So yeah, I think it's just the inevitable consequences, team principals saying what they got to say after a controversial incident.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I don't think there's a lot that Lando could have done differently other than not locking up his brakes the first time he tried to pass him. And I don't say that because I'm on a British podcast. I mean, they're both Belgian. I'm Belgian. I'm neutral, okay? So that doesn't make a difference. Yeah, it is very much a case of team boss backs driver. Yeah, it is close after the race, so it's kind of normal for them to have a different opinion on it, and maybe in a few times we'll look at it differently, but maybe we won't acknowledge it in public.
Yeah, we'll move on the conversation in just a few moments. The final one, you've both mentioned Andrea Stella and what he said about, if you don't address these things honestly, they will come back, and it's certainly come back right now. How do you think this is going to be resolved? What do you think is going to happen over the next few weeks?
I don't know, honestly. And Stella said, this needs to be resolved. We need to talk to the FIA about this. FIA have obviously just, they've not punished the braking. Sorry, they've not punished the moving on the braking. They've given Max a penalty for the incident and 2 penalty points. So it seems like from the FIA's point of view, it's case closed. So that's why Stella is saying, we need to have a talk at some point. There are a few mechanisms, a few committees where they can do so. Team manager briefings, strategy meetings, there's all sorts. I don't think they'll have a case to review the race itself, because that's final. But there are definitely going to be talks with the FIA, with the other teams about, are we applying the rules correctly? Should the rules be tweaked in any way or tightened up to prevent this from happening again? What
about you, Alex? Do you think it's pretty much an agreement, or?
Yeah, I think what's just quite helpful is the fact that there's another race at the weekend. I do also think perhaps Silverstone absolutely delighted that the British winner won the race, and that Lando Norris and Max Verstappen, it looks pretty box office. I mean, I thought it was pretty box office in Spain, and that was another Max win. So yeah, they'll hopefully be, from their point of view, be selling the last of those very expensive tickets. But yeah, my point is it's good that they don't go away. It's not going to die down. It's going to be fresh in everybody's minds, and that's when action can be taken. McLaren has a fair bit of power. It could protest the results of the race. We've seen more spurious protests before, and saying, look, Max's driving wasn't punished, wasn't even investigated in terms of moving under braking. So they could do that. They would definitely lose, because the FIA always loses, makes those cases lose, but it would just get it in, under the microscope with, the officials, with the people that apply the rules. So potentially that's one way they could do it. I wouldn't expect them to, because they will know the outcome. They thought they had a decent chance of protesting the qualifying results, and that was thrown out from the FIA's point of view quite quickly. So yeah, it's I'm just delighted, heading to Silverstone on Thursday, that there was something. There's some good storylines. There's some good needle with journalists. We love a good story, and it's great for Formula One that it's happened. And yeah, as I said, still England need a boost to the English fans who'll be at Silverstone, not the Scottish and the Welsh maybe. So yeah, a bit of needle's always nice.
No, as a proud Englishman, I've got a feeling we won't be worrying about the Euros by the time Silverstone comes around. Now, it's maybe a cheeky question, maybe we all know the answer to this one. Are there question marks over Lando Norris's racecraft after his exceeding track limits multiple times in that battle? Let's start with you, Phil.
I wouldn't say question marks, but I think what has been surfacing over the past couple of races is that you need to be at 100% as a team, as a driver, to defeat Max Verstappen, or it's not going to happen, because he'll find a way to beat you, even if the car is maybe slightly slower. We've seen that a couple of times now where there were tiny mistakes by McLaren, by Lando, that have been punished. And the latest one was in the sprint race where Lando left the door wide open for Verstappen to waltz through and take the race win there from him. And Lando's obviously very hard on himself, as he always does. Very trademark Lando Norris there. But yeah, he will have to tighten up his game a bit to defeat Max. But I thought he kind of did today. We mentioned the dive bombing. Yeah, it didn't always look as pretty, but you have to take your chances. And if that contact hadn't happened, remember now Norris had the DRS on him as well to go out of turn 3. I think he probably would have beaten Verstappen. So then would we have still debated Norris' racecraft? Maybe not. But yeah, he was clearly very distraught at messing up in the sprint, and he seems extremely determined not to let that happen again this time.
Yeah, I think Phil's point about turn 4 at the sprint race yesterday is a bigger question about Lando's racecraft. That was a sort of as he called it, an amateur error, because we just know how hard Max is going to drive. Like, it's pretty on the limit actually what Max did in reclaiming the lead in the sprint race, and he pulled it off superbly. Fair play to him, but just shows you again, he always goes brutal, Max, which is fair enough. But yeah, I think it comes back to my point. The track limits violations are two separate things. Lando was against the rules, shouldn't have done what he did in terms of earning all those strikes, but not really fair to say there's a track limits problem when he attacked and he went off the track. And I still do raise the point, yeah, he locked up and he went off, but there's mitigating circumstances. Max was coming across towards him, and that has an impact when it comes to the wheel, when it comes to the understeer and the locking. So yeah, it's not like Lando just came from absolutely nowhere and completely messed it up all by himself. There was he was making a reaction to Max's reaction. So yeah, it's interesting. I'm just delighted that having criticised Lando in 2023 for not racing Max very hard, having very frank and honest and excellent chat with him at the end of the year, and writing a column apology saying sorry for being so harsh on you, because he backed it up. His point was, look, as soon as I've got a car where I can race Max Verstappen, I'm going to fight him as hard as he fights me. And he showed it, and I think that's fantastic. For Lando, probably in a way good for Max. Well, he claims that he wants a big fight. He's certainly got one now, and it's definitely good for Formula One.
Yeah, for Max, it's a good opportunity for him to prove that he is the best there's ever been, the greatest F1 driver of all time, or whatever he wants to prove. Now, what about George Russell then? Surely we should be giving George Russell huge credit for the fact that he was in the position to claim the victory on the back of those two. That must be agreed by both, surely. Yeah,
he was in the right time, at right place. I think he joked about it yesterday that he was hoping that they would collide. I believe it was to Sky Sports, but I could be wrong. Yeah, he was in the right place to take advantage of that, and fair play to him. Mercedes wasn't too far behind. They were still lacking in sort of the high-speed corners where Red Bull is so quick. But they were there. He did nothing wrong, and he was there when it mattered. So fair play to him. And it's good for Mercedes, good for F1 that Mercedes have a taste of victory again, and will be looking to make it more of a three-way fight or a four-way fight than it maybe has been, because both Mercedes and Ferrari are still lagging a bit behind compared to the two top teams now, McLaren and Red Bull. But this is a good storyline again, as Alex said, not just for Silverstone and their ticket sales, but the more winners you can get in F1, the better, isn't it?
Yeah, I've realised, by the way, I don't need to keep an eye on the football score, because I can hear the English journos in the media centre reacting whenever anything happens in the game that they're obviously watching on their phones or iPads or whatever. But anyway, George Russell, it's interesting. Spoke to him in Spain, and obviously that was following on from the Canadian Grand Prix, where he'd made a lot of mistakes, and his point was, look, like, I'm pushing harder and making myself be more on the limit because I'm not satisfied with, his point, like, in 2022 I was in the top 5 more than anybody else, that second doesn't interest him. He knows, it's a bit like Lando. He knows he's got to get everything perfect, really push all the boundaries, especially in the Mercedes compared to the McLaren, to get a one-off victory. And that was what contributed to his mistakes in Canada. But what was particularly interesting about the chat that I had with him was that he was saying, look, this year I've made a particular focus on my mindset and meaning I can bounce back from setbacks, and I think he did that superbly well in Barcelona with his racing at the start. Went wheel to wheel with Max, went wheel to wheel with Lewis. Yeah, he was defeated in both of those battles, but came out of it with a great deal of respect, I thought. And then he's just continued that this weekend. The Red Bull Ring is a really hard track. It's a short track, so the differences in lap time aren't massive, and the drivers that are really on it are really rewarded. We saw that with Max in qualifying yesterday. George Russell is blowing away a 7-time world champion in qualifying this year, and in the races I think Mercedes still feels Lewis has an edge when things are all right with him. He had floor damage today, his fault. He hit the curb at turn 8 too hard, and again in SQ3 he damaged the floor there as well. But look, George Russell, I think that's also the question mark, is we don't know actually, is Lewis really pushing everything out? There's huge question marks over what's going on in his last year at Mercedes, the fact that he's off to Ferrari, but Russell can't do anything about that. He can only control what's in front of him, and he's not doing a Sergio Perez. He's absolutely delivering. He put himself into the right place to capitalise today. So yeah, not, I'm sure, how ultimately he'd want to win his second Formula One race, but the position that Mercedes finds itself in, he'll take it.
Yeah, I'm sure he will. The first Mercedes victory in 36 Grand Prix. It's certainly a long wait, and George Russell can claim both of those victories. It's a good tally for him, his 13th podium in his Formula One career. Let's move it on slightly then to the number of penalties that were dished out. We know there have been changes and new sensors have been put in. There have been changes to the gravel traps, to the curbs as well. Do you think it's been a bit over officious, over studious maybe, or do you think that the FAA are just going to bat it off and say, look, this was done in response to media, fans and teams and drivers alike? What are your thoughts on this?
I think it's very much a work in progress. I think the turn 9 and 10 gravel traps worked really well. And it's a bit of a shame that it was overshadowed by Oscar Piastri's incident in turn 6, because that's where they didn't really narrow the curve that much. And that somehow they thought it was fine, but there was somehow a car width in between the white line and the gravel trap, and Oscar managed to find it, and he was out by what? I don't know. I personally can't tell if he was out or not, and McLaren questioned it as well, because apparently the helicopter camera images they used were quite blurry. So it's one of those, I think learning moments. They should really just make sure that this can't happen again. They did such a good job with making sure these new gravel traps are very close to the white line, so if you do go off, you'll be in the gravel before you go out of bounds, so there's no way you can get a proper an advantage from it. And we've spoke to the FIA, Alex as well. I think he's been on the case as well from home, that this an experiment, so there is going to be room for improvement. But hopefully we'll be able to roll this sort of solution out to many more circuits. We've got plenty of problematic ones, don't we? We've got Qatar and Austin, off the top of my head, are two circuits where track limits have always been a bit of a mess as well. So I think it's a positive weekend for that. It is a shame about the Piastri incident, which has overshadowed it a bit. But I think we are making progress, and it was really interesting this weekend how nobody spoke about track limits before the sprint. It was, everybody was kind of happy with it. It disappeared off the agenda almost completely. So, I'm glad we are talking about on-track action instead of debating why people got penalised for track limits constantly.
Yeah, I think with that, the FIA sort of solved the problem 99%, and Oscar Piastri managed to find the 1% that they hadn't solved. And I think, there's a big question mark. My conversation with the FIA is that, it felt the solution at turn 6 was fine. Well, why not just paint more of the curb black and extend the track a little bit and narrow the curb? There's sort of this, is it a type of curb that meant they couldn't do that? It just seems very odd. There's sort of a few question marks. This track, are they being overly officious by penalising drivers crossing the white line and entry to the pits? Well, no, I don't think they are, because it's incredibly dangerous if you swing across that complex, or go off your line or change your speed or whatever. There's just going to be a plane crash accident. And yeah, Phil references Qatar and Austin as places where track limits are going to be a problem. But I just think the Red Bull Ring is the hardest track to officiate. I think there's so many factors, including the fact that the braking zones are steeply uphill, so you can brake a bit later, so the driver is going to be a bit bolder. Like Lando Norris told me in Spain, he doesn't use marker boards as references for where he brakes. He just brakes where he feels like it. How do we know that's not a factor in why maybe he locked up or why things have happened? The nature of this track, I love it. I think it's brilliant. I wouldn't change anything other than making the curves a little bit narrower so the drivers can't totally run on them and get that one track limits violation. So yeah, it's interesting. I don't feel like the officials have been overly officious here. I think there's been some like black and white cases of penalties. Sergio Perez in the pits. I feel like, something's happened. I can feel my stream over there is different. There's clapping in the media centre. Excellent, good, right. Well done, everybody. Well done, the FIA. Well done, England. They could be Slovakia fans, I suppose. But anyway.
You will please know it's on the big screen here. So I don't think there's a lot being done here productivity-wise. But yeah, one of the many big screens here is dedicated to the football game. So that explains that.
Excellent.
No, listen, guys. My internet unfortunately just dropped away at that exact moment. But I'm going to pick up on the stories of drop points, because it was mentioned very briefly just there, Alex, as well. We're not going to go into too much about Sergio Perez, but what I want to talk about is Ferrari. So Carlos Sainz. A great weekend for him, outscoring his teammate who didn't score any points at all. But what's going on at Ferrari? They're really not scoring the points. And are they getting concerned at Maranello at just how far back they seem to be now? Alex, what do you reckon?
Yeah, I think it's very interesting. If you listen to Fred Vasseur, what he says to the media, obviously I'm not in Austria, but having read what our colleagues, what Phil and everybody have been gathering on the ground, if you read his quotes, there's absolutely no problem. But that's Fred's style. He's very effective at deflecting. He's just like, I'm gonna make my own joke and laugh at my own joke, and then I won't answer your question. And he's very good at obscuring it in a very charming way. And effectively, what he's saying is, look, it came down to qualifying. Charles made a mistake. If he'd been put the lap in on new tyres, he'd have been up there with Max on pole and things like that, and it would have been a whole different story. It changes your race, and he's not wrong. Charles Leclerc's Grand Prix would not have gone so disastrously had he not been starting in the pack as a result of his own errors. But yeah, I think Ferrari's big problem, and it really is a big problem, because it seems that they are now Mercedes. Like, not only are they fourth best on the last couple of weekends, but they appear to be suffering with high-speed bouncing in corners, which is robbing their drivers of confidence. And that's exactly what Mercedes faced at the beginning of the year. And there's all this chat about what actually fixes that. Mercedes are adamant it's their front wing concept. A lot of chat about flexing wings and how that potentially, I'm not saying anybody's doing anything illegal, but if you can do it well within the rules, you will gain. So are Ferrari not gaining enough, or have they introduced something in those Spain upgrades that has introduced this high-speed bouncing? And that's a real problem for the drivers. There's also chat about what was Carlos Sainz's suffering with brake problems and things like that in qualifying. But yeah, it's not good for Ferrari. It's really not good, because they'll feel disappointed that they're not in the fight with Red Bull and McLaren at the front, having been Red Bull's closest rival at the start of the year. They've clearly, it's not gone backwards, but they've not just gone forwards at the same rate as McLaren. But the fact that they weren't even there to pick up the pieces when these drivers finally do collide, and Sergio Perez is obviously absent, that's a real bad showing for Ferrari. So yeah, something's got to be urgently addressed, because otherwise this is their lot for the rest of the year.
39 points is all Ferrari have scored in the last 3 Grand Prix, and that includes a sprint race as well, so it's not good enough. But another team that have a Ferrari engine is Haas, and they did really well. Hülkenberg finished in 6th, Magnussen just a couple of positions further back in P8. How impressed have you both been about their progress, particularly in the more recent months, should we say, more recent Grand Prix, Alex?
Yeah, definitely. I think there was a great deal of showing the Alpine drivers how teammates can race fairly, I thought, between the Haas drivers today, which is quite interesting. Although, to be fair, Esteban Ocon eventually gave Pierre Gasly some room, and Gasly got by with an impressive overtake at turn 4. But yeah, Haas, I mean, yeah, I'm really impressed by them, considering, I think it's always got to be considered how they're not a big factory operation, how things are just done differently and things like that at that team. It is a smaller team. I mean, Hulkenberg at the moment, you got to think, I've given away my 2025 results, because there's no way. I mean, the Sauber was awful this weekend, like awful in qualifying. They even changed the rear wing arrangement, Sauber, to make the car handle better. Both Valtteri Bottas and Zhou Guanyu pretty happy with it after qualifying, and it was so slow. It's really bad. So yeah, that's what Hulkenberg's going to next year. He'll be pleased, no doubt, because he'll be an Audi Works driver in 2026. But with Haas, the only thing I'll flag is that they historically go well at Austria. Like Mick Schumacher here, think of him fighting Lewis Hamilton in 2022, earning his first points, things like that. Like, it could easily be track specific here. I'm not trying to do them down. I'm just saying it's worth pointing out. But what's really interesting is that it was both cars today. Across the weekend, Kevin Magnussen, Ayako Matsu, saying he's racing the sprint race where he drove away from the drivers that were around him by the end of the race. He said that was our best stint on tyre management, on tyre wear, all those problems that plagued them in 2023. So, if that's a sign of things to come, fantastic for Haas.
Yeah, I think what happened here is that finally their upgrades that they brought for this type of circuit finally really managed to get that work and work well with this type of circuit, where you've got these high speed swoops towards the second half of the lap where you're just losing or gaining so much lap time and tyre wear. So I think this is where their upgrades finally sort of were brought to life a bit, and it helped their car so much. It's very impressive. Splitting a Red Bull is not entirely their own merit. It's also on Checo, who has had another shocker of a weekend. But yeah, they've been very good. There was a little bit of an issue, as Alex said at the start, with both of them, both of Nico and Kevin being a bit paranoid about, if I'm going to have to save tyres, is my teammate going to have to save tyres as well? Are we saving the same amount? But yeah, they got it. There wasn't a big issue. They managed to work together well. And 6th and 8th, it's fantastic for them. Obviously helped by Lando dropping out and Leclerc dropping out, but they were there and ahead of the other midfield teams.
Well, look, we won't talk too much about points and Sergio Perez and what's going on at Red Bull with him, because it looks like Red Bull are probably going to have enough points over the course of the season with what Max is doing to at least get their hands on the Constructors' title if it carries on as it currently is. But one team that are having a real shocker at the moment is Aston Martin. It's been going on for a little while right now. But what is going on there, Phil, at Aston Martin? And what's going on there behind you as well? Now, what's going on at Aston Martin?
Yeah, I know. I agree with you, Bryn. Checo Perez is a bit of a broken record with his struggles, but I think the same applies to Aston Martin, because it's been a couple of races now where they've just, they've completely lost any sort of competitiveness. And the problem with their car is they haven't developed as well as the others, as they have done the previous year. But then they also have this weakness in sort of the long, high-speed corners where their car balance is just all over the place, and they're finding it really hard to balance those corners and low-speed corners. Red Bull Ring is one of the circuits where you have all types. You have slow corners at the start of the lap and high-speed at the end. Same in Barcelona, they were nowhere there, and Silverstone is not going to be any better. So they are just desperate for upgrades, and upgrades that work. Fernando Alonso, we spoke to him again a couple of times this weekend. He seems to be getting chippier and chippier every weekend that this goes on. He said last week, less talk, more action, and his mood hasn't exactly improved this weekend. He's so fed up with having to explain why the car isn't great. He needs to see improvement very quickly.
Yeah, he certainly does. I mean, Checo also needs to see improvement in his luck, doesn't he? Damaged side pods there, part of the cause of why he didn't get the result perhaps that he could or even should have. Final question, though, maybe. Any standout performances other than the ones we've already mentioned, Alex?
Well, standout performances. Harry Kane, apparently. I couldn't really work out what had gone on there, Phil. I thought maybe England had let a result in based on the sort of the feedback I was getting through your microphone from the media centre, but apparently not. It's all going terribly well. I do apologise to anyone who's not interested in football. I'm not even that interested in football. I just find tournament football more interesting than most. But anyway, standout performances. I think got to be Daniel Ricciardo getting points for RB. Obviously, that that only comes about because of what happens with Lando Norris and Max Verstappen in terms of the total that Ricciardo ended up with. But he came into the weekend with everybody going, right, that's it. Liam Lawson's basically in the car because Helmut Marko's decreed it. He's gone by the summer break. And I mean, it's a weekend where his teammate Yuki Tsunoda is in the news for all of the wrong reasons, for his appalling use of language in qualifying, and I'm very glad he came out and apologised correctly, as Max Verstappen did not do in 2020 for exactly the same thing. So a lot of attention and a lot of negative attention on RB this weekend, and Ricciardo, he's waded through it and he's put in an excellent result. He was very unfortunate. Just as I said, this track is tiny margins because it's so short, and that's why he didn't make Q3 yesterday. Tsunoda, for his part, he disgraced himself already by that point, but the end of Q2 felt he completely blew a Q3 op shot. So it was possible for RB, but Ricciardo responded well on the Sunday and delivered. And again, is this all Helmut Marko just trying to get a rise in performance out of Daniel Ricciardo? I don't think we can rule that out. I also think that we know he's not sold on him, and this saga isn't going to go away. That literally the next time Ricciardo has a dip, because the RB drivers are all over the place in terms of consistency of results this season, as is the team since that upgrade, that Lawson question is going to come up. But at the very least, Ricciardo can walk away from the Red Bull ring and feel really happy about what he did.
Yeah, I agree. I was going to pick Ricciardo as well, actually, Alex, because he's had so much stuff written about him, said about him. That man walking, and he's not giving up. So he's been very competitive again, relative to what the car can do, because they are still struggling a little bit at RB. They brought upgrades last weekend. They didn't work, so they had to go back on spec, mix and match them a bit. I think, if I'm not mistaken, Tsunoda completed the race on the old spec fully, whereas Daniel was still sort of mixing and matching parts. So they still have work to do, and they're not as competitive as they have been. But yeah, Daniel has shown a lot of resilience, has shown a lot of hunger to get it right, and he deserves to be criticised for his lackluster performances. So he also deserves to be praised when he gets the job done. And yeah, in the dead men walking category, I would say Kevin Magnussen as well. He's been sort of written off many times. Why is he still in F1? And he delivered, especially in the sprint race, where he finished just outside the points, but at the head of the midfield, essentially. And he was good again and today. So he deserves a mention as well, I feel.
Yeah, I think so. And also, with Ricciardo, one performance does not a good season make. But look, it's great to give credit to him where credit is due. Daniel Ricciardo and Magnussen both getting the plaudits that they deserve. Gents, thank you very much indeed, as always.
Cheers, Bryn. And Phil, thank you very much for keeping me updated on the football score via your microphone. I mean, it's worth explaining because the listeners, the viewers would have wondered what on earth the racket was coming through at various points. But anyway, yeah. Cheers.
Yeah, well, look, Alex, I just saved you a lot of time, so you don't have to rewatch your game. You can crack on with your mag reports and features. So it's
Thank you very much.
I'm always happy to watch the highlights. I'm always happy to watch the highlights when I know that there's a victory coming, so I might have to tune into those in just a bit. But here we go. Here's what the championship standings look like after Austria. Verstappen leads the way, 237 points ahead of Lando. Norris in second on 156. Charles Leclerc 150, just 6 points off, and Carlos Sainz a little bit further back in fourth. Then it's Perez, Oscar Piastri, George Russell and Lewis Hamilton, with Alonso and Tsunoda making up the top 10. Still yet to score though is Zhou Guanyu, Valtteri Bottas and Logan Sargent. In the constructors, well, it's Red Bull leading the way, 355 points there ahead of Ferrari on 291, but the gap is coming down. McLaren now closing it to 268 points now, and Mercedes on 196. Then it's Aston Martin, RB, Haas, Alpine, Williams and Kick Sauber still yet to score. Well, that just about does it for our Austrian Grand Prix review. What a race that was, and hopefully we'll have more of the same when the circus heads to Silverstone for the British Grand Prix. We can't wait.